Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Kristin Skelton, and I am the founder of Bud Funding, a enterprise dedicated to sustainable education. And today I have a special guest with me. I have Mike Dorion, and Mike is a speaker, facilitator, and the compost kid at Living Soil Solutions, as well as a farmer composter at Highfield Regenerative Farm. Mike, how are you? And I also want to say thank you so much for joining me today.
No problems. Thanks for having us, Kristin. And I'm doing pretty good. It's another smoky day here in Calgary, but we're still able to get some stuff done. So another day, another day.
Yeah. So another friend told me to connect with you because you are the soil expert, and we all want to know how we can improve our soil. But before we dive right in, I want to know, how did you get into soil in the first place?
Yeah. So it was back in 2011. I came across permaculture, and I ended up taking my PDC with Verge Permaculture. And they put on a few more courses that summer. And it was in the fall of 2011. They had this gentleman named Doug Weatherby come up, and he was teaching his dirty tricks for a 4 day kind of dirty tricks thing on soil. And I had brought my friend of my family down as well, and he has his 4 year soil science degree already. And those 4 days, we were just blown away. And he was like, I learned more in 4 days than in 4 years.
Really?
So yeah, and it made kind of the link to all the things I'd been learning that summer already. And it was just the soil really reached me the best. And I made my business right in the class on our breaks, and then I launched
Super
it that
cool.
next spring.
Wow. You're like just super inspired. Hey, that's really cool.
Yeah, it all made sense to me, and it was like, why isn't more of this stuff happening right now anyway? So we jumped into it.
That's
Two
that's
we
really neat. That's really cool. So is your are you guys partners?
Sorry.
Are you guys partners in the business?
Oh, like my friend of the family?
Yeah.
No, he started his own business fairly
Oh,
similar, but he's based at a Rocky Mountain house. So we do definitely help each other out quite a bit. He's Miami Soil Services, and we're Living Soil Services.
okay.
And yeah, so we support each other where we can, and but both on the same
Yeah.
team essentially, right?
So let's learn all about soil now. Let's dive right in. So I want to know, how is soil formed and what are the different components of soil?
Yeah, so soil is formed. Typically, a lot of it is previously been formed by weathering, right? So with a lot of the glacier stuff, or with water running over rock and even wind. But a lot of it, and for us looking forward while we're here, because we don't want to wait 1,000 years for a bit of soil to be made, is decomposition is one of the faster ways to make soil. So taking any kind of organic matter, and making it break down into the basic components of what becomes soil again. So
Yeah, very cool. And I when I was looking over your social media and your website and different areas, I saw that you were talking about how many organisms are in soil. And so I want to know, are there more organisms that live on soil, or are there more organisms that live on land and in water? And can you tell us a little bit about those organisms?
yeah, definitely. So yeah, there's way more organisms down below the ground than there are anything above ground.
That's
Like it's
so
a
crazy to like think wrap your head around.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And because it's out of sight, out of mind, and a good chunk of them are microbes, so you need a microscope to see them, and so we can't see them with the naked eye. You just don't think about them, but they're everywhere, and they reproduce so fast, and they've been here for a long time, way longer than we have. So yeah, there's tons of them, and that whole relationship of what's been going on down there has been coined the soil food web. I think a lot of people are starting to become very familiar with this term, And essentially it's just showcasing this like relationship of all these like little critters down in the soil, and what they're doing, and some are taking nutrients from stone and sand and silt and clay and organic matter, and others are ripping things up into smaller pieces so that then the other critters can go, and then some are predatoring on those ones, and then they're eating and pooping and puking and mixing everything all up into this big thing until we have what we call soil essentially. And you've got this nice porous crumbly substance that can grow plants really really well.
Wow, very cool.
Yeah.
And which of those organisms can we see? Can we see any of them?
Yeah, so the first four are the microscopic ones that we can't. So the bacteria, the fungi. The fungi, once it starts putting out a lot of mycelium, you can start to see it. It's those like little spider web strands that you'll see on like a tree that's fallen in the forest, or if you got a mulch pile sitting, they'll start to form in there. The protozoa we can't really see, and then the nematodes. There's a large diversity of different types of nematodes, and there's some that you can just barely see, but for the most part, a lot of them are microbe styles that we need the microscope. So then we move into that next kind of trophic level, and then we're looking at like springtails and mites. So we can start to see those guys, but typically they just look like little specks, and but they have their purpose. And then you start to move into the larger creatures, right? So like the beetles, the centipedes, the ants, the worms, those kinds of critters, and they're all doing their little dance, their little soil dance.
And we all need all of them in order to have healthy soil. So would you say that like unhealthy soil doesn't have all of those guys in it?
Yeah, for sure. You need that diversity, right? And what I've always said is, if you don't have any of the life in that soil, then your soil's dead. It's dirt. So we need to make sure that the soil is alive, and that's just what we need to wrap our head around. There's lots going on in there. There's tons of critters. So we need to treat that soil with respect so that those critters can live and do their thing.
And what does healthy soil look like?
Healthy soil look like? So visually, it's going to be very crumbly. It's going to smell really nice. Lots of pore
What does it
spaces.
smell like?
It smells. I guess like if you go into a forest and you get that kind of like mossy kind of foresty smell, it kind of has that smell, right? Like it's very pleasant. Like I don't know anybody that would smell that and go, oh, gross, right? Like even the little kids that are like, oh, I don't want to get dirty, but they're like, ooh, that smells very nice. And yeah, it's got some structure to it, right? Because so if it's really compacted and tight, then we can't get airflow, we can't get water down there, and those are what the microbes need to survive, just like we do. So if we kind of think what we need to survive, what they would need, and provide that in the soil and make sure that it's loose and crumbly and has lots of structure, then those critters are going to be able to do their thing and keep that soil healthy and keep recycling it and making it healthier and healthier.
So what say if we had healthy soil and it started to degrade, what affects soil quality? What would make soil unhealthy over time?
Yeah, so if we look at like a lot of native prairie, which there's very little of anymore, or even just an untouched forest, that system is running itself, right? Nobody's fertilizing that system, nobody's watering that system. It takes care of itself. So this is a big thing of using permaculture and stuff, is looking at what nature's already done and how can we work within that system, or at least replicate it. So like biomimicry is another term that people are using for this. And so if we go and start digging the soil up, well, think of that little village or city that's already been made in that soil, and now we've just destroyed it. So now they have to build that all back up again, and we've probably decimated a ton of them and killed a lot of them off. Um, you know, the emergence of synthetic fertilizers and the herbicides and all that stuff. So yeah, these are chemical processes that are made to attack certain things, but they don't realize that they're having a huge other amount of effects on other creatures and organisms and in that environmental system. We don't look at our things very holistically. We're trying to be very spot orientated, and it doesn't work that way, right?
Mhm.
So if we look at a synthetic fertilizer, it's a salt base. So if you keep using that same product over and over again in that system, well, then that salt is going to build up. And what does salt do? Salt pulls moisture to it. So the first thing it's going to do is going to pull it from those creatures, all those microbes, and they're going to die out. And then it starts to pull it from the plant. So then in the long term, you're not really helping yourself. It's more of a band-aid solution.
So maybe you could tell us a little bit about fertilizers if people are wanting to use fertilizer. What are your thoughts on that? Do you have any that you would recommend?
Yeah, like they're, it we were only taught a certain thing, and this is what a lot of people are still being taught is, you want to grow something, you go buy your NPK and you apply it per what it says on the instructions, and you go for it. But think of how many nutrients a plant probably really needs. So besides just nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, they're going to need calcium, magnesium, boron, zinc, all these other micro and macronutrients. And so we need to provide that environment for those plants to have that. And if we don't, then they're not going to get everything that they need. So it's not going to be a very healthy plant. So then they're going to be that much more susceptible to disease and pathogens. So there's a lot more organic fertilizers that are coming out. I like looking at stuff that is more on the natural praise. Like if I can mix it with water and spray my kid with it, and she's not going to come down with a rash or like it burns or anything like that, then I think it's going to be safe to use on my plants and in my soil. So looking at the liquid fishes and the liquid kelps and um, using the molasses and people are starting to see really good success with making these liquid composts and that kind of thing. And I think there's enough information out there and there's enough access to some of these products that everybody could put them to use. Like looking at what a lot of the indigenous used to do, especially if they were on the coast. On the coast, they would use a lot of seaweed and that kind of stuff because they had access to it. Sometimes they would even use seawater itself because it has so many minerals in it,
Mhm.
right? So just figuring out what you have in your environment and then putting that to use.
Mhm. Absolutely. So I want to know, are there different types of soil around the world?
Yeah, there's different soils all over the place, and a lot of it'll come down into kind of the soil taxonomy, and we don't need to get too scientific and specific on that stuff. But like in Alberta here, we have it's the Chernozomic and Luvisal soils. So just really hard words to say, and a lot of people are like, "Well, what's that?" But it comes down from basically how it was formed with grinding of the rocks and the glaciers and that kind of thing. But in the long run of it all, whether the soil was formed by different rock formations or weathering or whatnot, in the end, it's going to come down to your four ingredients. You're going to have a certain amount of clay. You're going to have a certain amount of silt, a certain amount of sand, and then we want to have a certain amount of organic matter in there to kind of help glue it all together and help feed the organisms so that they can then make those three minerals into structure so that we have good healthy soil.
Is there like a certain ratio that we would maybe need of each of those?
Well, ideally, if we could have the best, if we could have 33% of each, like 33% sand, 33% silt, 33% clay, then we'd have great loam to work with. But we don't have that. We got to work with what we got. So, say for example, here in Alberta, we've got really heavy clay soils, and clay's not a bad thing. It's good at holding moisture. It's good at holding nutrients, but it can get really tight. So how do we lighten that up? Well, we got to get organic matter in there. And that organic matter is the key for all of them. So if we've got really heavy sandy soil and the water flows through too fast, get some more organic matter in there. And that becomes the sponge of the soil. So it'll help hold the water retention, help hold the nutrients longer in the soil, give the organisms kind of a place to live so that they can do their thing and start to increase the structure and make that soil healthier and healthier.
And so I know that soil gives nutrients to plants, but how does it do that?
Cool. That's a great question. So if we looked back at the synthetic side again, now when a plant is pulling water up through its roots, it will pull any kind of nutrient that is soluble in that form around that root zone. And it'll just pull it up as it goes, as it needs it. But for the most part, a lot of the nutrients in our soils they're locked up. So they're not soluble. Well, why would that be? Well, if we look at the organism's role in the soil, they're going and mining that sand silt clay and the organic matter, and they're helping unlock those nutrients. So let's look at bacteria, for example. These guys, by millions of numbers, are going and they're mining using enzymes and taking all these nutrients into them, and so they become these little bags of fertilizer. So you got your root here, and then there's all these bacteria surrounding the whole thing with all these nutrients in it. But then we have the predators come in, like the nematodes or the protozoas, and they start mowing down on all these nutrients with these bacteria. And then they take what they need for their metabolic process. And then they're like, well, after you eat a lot, what do you got to do? You got to poop. So then they're pooping now out these nutrients in a form that's soluble that the plant can take up as it needs. And it's like some of the research that is coming out right now, it's super, super interesting. Like, if the plant is craving calcium, it will put out some kind of sensor going, oh, okay, I need calcium. So then the organisms will be attracted that have calcium in them, and then they'll get mowed down, and the calcium is now available. Like there's a lot more going on down there with like information transfer and stuff that we can't even fathom right now.
That is so cool. And I also heard like there's been a few studies done of how trees actually like communicate with each other. And yeah, that's awesome. And I can't wait to learn more about that and see, what that type of research will show us.
Yeah, that relationship is awesome, and it's really taking people by storm. The whole mycorrhizal network of fungi below the soil, and like I always make a joke in my talks with that movie Avatar, and they said, "Oh, we're all connected," and it's like that's what the mycorrhizal fungi is doing. It's like the internet of the soil. It's pretty cool.
So do you have any practical tips for someone that might have dead and dry soil to transform it to healthy and living soil? And how long do you think that would take?
Yeah, so a real good one to look just to give people some hope is I think it was called Greening the Desert. If one Googles that on YouTube, and it showcases what they were doing in the desert where it wasn't growing anything, and they were able to start to grow orchards of like palm trees and figs and that kind of thing. But the biggest one is we want to make sure that we can first of all trap moisture there. So if we've got dry, dead soil, then let's get something on top of that soil that can actually hold some moisture there. And then as we can get moisture, then that gives the organisms a chance to be able to do their thing. And then a great way to get some really good life is the cover crop side of things has become very, very key in kind of turning things around. So these are plants that grow very, very quickly, but can produce large amounts of biomass above or below ground. So if we can let's use like a tillage radish or a daikon radish, for example. So this will produce a big tuber and help break up the soil and that dry, dead dirt and push it aside. And then we leave it in there just to rot. And if it rots, it's going to attract organisms to it to now start eating that and taking it into the subsoils. So now we're spreading that organic matter through. So we can speed that stuff up pretty fast. So once we get the organic matter, we get the moisture, then it's going to help to start breaking up that soil so that we can get some airflow and stuff down there too and make it aerobic. And then we can start moving into that next succession of plants and getting some more diversity of organisms in there. So I've seen, like, we're going to be doing some stuff here at this brownfield farm that we're running here in Calgary, where we're going to test some of the really crappy dry dead dirt and then see how long we can take to turn it around. But I've read with some of the stuff Nicole Masters has done and even Elaine Ingham, where anywhere from like 3 to 4 years you can make a big turnaround. Some people have done it even quicker. It depends on different environmental factors and stuff that you're going to have as well. Like, are you going to get a lot of rain? Is it super hot out, and that kind of thing. But it's possible to be done, and we need to do it a lot right now because we got to turn some things around.
And once we have that soil, is there anything we need to do to protect it?
Yeah. So this is something that me and a few of my colleagues have been chatting about, and I think we as a human species need to chat about this more as well. And I think this is a big tie into, the indigenous people that were controlling a lot of the land, and treating it like they were the stewards essentially. So they were taking care of it. That's, I think, our purpose on this planet. Like, we're all sharing this. We're a bunch of roommates on this one big, you know, condo building, but we all need to do our part to take care of it, right? And so, like that forest definition that I gave before, um, we need to have very little disturbance. So don't disturb the soil if we don't have to, because every time you disturb it, you're wrecking that network that's being built below ground. Um, we don't want to typically grow just one type of plant that doesn't exist in nature. We want to grow multiple diversity of plants. Okay, so that's a big one. And then the soil doesn't like to be ever left bare. So if we could always have something growing on it, or at least leaving some kind of residue in it. So look again at a forest, like the leaves drop down from the tree, but nobody's going out there to rake them away, right? We're letting them rot in space so that they're going to break down and then return nutrients back to that tree again. So those are going to be three of the big ones, is covering those bases, and then we're going to be able to maintain that soil, so keep it sustainable, but then keep making it better and better and better and better, and take that to the next level.
That's so cool and that's super exciting. And my last question for you, what is your favorite thing about soil?
Um, I think my favorite thing about it is just the basis that it's like a whole nother world under there. Like, I remember the first time I went scuba diving, and it was like, whoa, look at all these creatures down here and stuff. And it's like, whoa. But now, like, putting things under the microscope, and I didn't think I would be into doing that, but it's like, wow, there's a lot going on here. And then an hour or two will go by, and I'm like, oh, I'm cross-eyed. I was like looking at these organisms swimming around and doing their thing on there. But so that part, and then I would connect that to just the basis that we're starting to show that soil health is very related to the same kind of biome that's going on in our gut system. So seeing what they're doing with, like, the technology of probiotics, and looking at how much of the microbes make up our human system. So for every human cell, there's like 10 bacteria that work with it. So, like, we're more bacteria than we are human. And a lot of that has to do with what's going on in the soil. So we are essentially the soil. So if we're feeling sick, it's because the soil is sick. So if we can make the soil healthy, then I think it'll make us healthy.
And
So that's like,
I have a new favorite thing about the soil. I think the thing that you said that the plants can communicate, like, oh, I need calcium. They can communicate with the microbes underground. Like that is so amazing to me. That is super cool.
yeah, like it's starting to blow people away, because it's, something that we really thought how this system worked, and we were way off. And now, so it's going to be really neat to see how it transitions in kind of to the mainstream of how people, work with their plants, and work with the soil that are growing their plants.
And Mike, if people want to connect with you, learn more about what you're doing, how do they do so?
Yeah, we can be found on Instagram at Living Soil Solutions. YouTube is also Living Soil Solutions, and Facebook is also Living Soil Solutions. And then I think on Twitter I'm under there as Soil Mike.
And I'll link all of that in the description down here. So Mike, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. I learned a ton. And
No
everyone,
problem.
thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for being part of the Bud Funding community. And I will see you next time. Bye.